Mpho.
Thank you, Commissar. From economic development, the first issue is to advocate for abolishment of use of consultants.
I think you want to get closer to the mic.
Okay, thank you. I was saying to advocate for abolishment of use of consultants in all spheres of government and call for the formalization of governance technical advisory services through an act of parliament as a public entity and build internal capacity. And let us give you a practical example on this particular issue. For an example, a parastatal called the CSIR, it procures the services of a consultant company called ATKenny. They spent in excess of 16 million rands on restructuring. And when you ask them where is the reports from this consultant company that you used, CSIR tells you that there is no report. I mean, restructuring is something that can be, done within the company itself. Now, the second issue is that the EFF rejects
approach to deal with the poverty in this country. And the South African president must take full responsibility in dealing and working with programs that are related to poverty alleviation. And we also believe that our media should be discouraged as well from airing programs that promote gender-based violence, drug and substance abuse. We also feel that we are also concerned in the manner in which alcohol and drugs are consumed in our country, especially by the youth. And we therefore support and feel that the Liquor Amendment Bill must be pushed, that we must have the blanket ban of the usage of alcohol, and the consequences of that must be clearly indicated when dealing with that. With arts and culture, we have also dealt with sports and recreation as well, with the inequalities that we see, especially with females in the sports industry or arena. We really feel that there should be the sponsors, the big businesses that are sponsoring the male-dominated sports should also do the same for the female-dominated sports. We should see our big clubs like Kaizer Chiefs, Orlando Pirates, having teams for women, Kaizer Chiefs women, Orlando Pirates women, and they must have the same support that their male counterparts are receiving, even with the salaries and the benefits as well. We also want to see...
Every time something ran out, I got a call from him.
Yeah.
Hey, Chief, is this how you are treating us?
Man, stop those things.
So I think you have him to celebrate, guys.
That's fake news. International relations. In particular, the point of the EFF now that it's going to go continental, agitating for the removal of suppressive regimes for progressive ones. My question is, how then do you protect the EFF from being used by Western forces who may have different reasons to remove the suppressive regimes? And also, where do you draw the line in terms of sovereignties of particular countries across the continent? Thank you very much.
Yes, next, Natasha.
It's Natasha here from SABC News. I just want clarity-seeking questions. I think I'll start off with Mamandisa Mashego. I don't know if I heard you properly inside plenary, but were you saying that the SABC must be the sole broadcaster on the African continent, or just please clarify that for me? And then still staying on the issue of the media, it seems as if the EFF is still resolute on isolating media that seeks to discredit the party. So in light of this, has the party probably engaged with SANEF? Has ENCA or has the EFF tried to reach out to one another? And then moving to international relations, where are my notes? What's his Tembi? I didn't get your surname properly.
Msan.
Ingi? Msan.
Msan.
Okay. You mentioned the issue of the EFF having African leaders to be known as president, and then one overall CIC. So, for example, let's just say Mbuyiseni is the president of South Africa, Mandisa is the EFF president of Zimbabwe, and then Mpho is the EFF president of Mozambique, and then you have the CIC, the overall CIC being Julius Malema. Do you mean that? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, next.
Mzwandile from SABC. As a follow-up to the international relations question, you said you want to set up regional centers for the EFF on the continent. Have you identified the regions or the countries where the EFF should be based? And given that there is the issue of sovereignty as well, you may not perhaps be able to do as easily as in South Africa. In some of the countries, they may have very restrictive laws. Perhaps you can even find yourselves banned there. So how are you going to navigate around that issue? Remember, they will be talking about the issue of sovereignty. I mean, if you have a situation where you say there's one CIC, my assumption is that that will be Julius Malema, because I think that this is where the EFF is born. So how are you really practically going to be able to do that? I mean, last time, Mr. Malema was not allowed to go just next door to Botswana. I don't know whether that situation has been resolved. So what if you then encounter issues like those where they say, well, this one is coming to mess up our people, he can't come in here. So how are you going to navigate around all those issues?
And the next, isn't it next to you? Yeah.
And this is my boss, by the way. Shocking.
It's being bossy.
Okay. Mine is just on clarity. I'm going to start with Ms. Ngwenya, Delisiwe Ngwenya, right? It is Delisiwe Ngwenya. Yes, on the social transformation. At plenary, you spoke, I don't know if I misunderstood, you spoke about the payment of social grants, how you would advocate for the establishment of a bank, or if you're going to be using existing banks, if I can just get clarity on that. And then Mandisa, just on the heavily regulations by CASA on SABC, if I can just, if you could just clarify or expand a little bit more on that, specifically on which regulations. Thanks.
Thank you. Next. Is this side? Yes. Comrades, please remember your numbers.
Busibo Chimombe from the SABC. I wanted to find out, I think it was from Mandisa, basically talking about the sharing of network infrastructure. Did I hear correctly when you talked about the fact that there needs to be a state-owned organization or institution that will look after that? And you also mentioned the name of Telkom in terms of that particular issue. If you could just clarify what you meant there.
Yeah.
Kaya Koko from the Star. I'd like to find out from Usis Delisile regarding the Liquor Amendment Bill. Something similar has been mooted by former Health Minister Aaron Motsoaledi around 2010, 2011, and subsequent years after that, but never really implemented. Has the EFF approached the current ANC MPs regarding that bill? Will it approach the ANC in trying to get that bill passed, much like the motion on Section 25 of the Constitution? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there's a last person somewhere. Lisa, you've spoken. Okay, Yan.
Thank you. Two questions, both to Ms. Ngwenya. The first being, you advocate for more funding for the Department of Women, Children and people living with disabilities, but you would know that state assets are, and state income are finite, which means you'd have to take somewhere to give somewhere else. Where would you take? The second question, you did deal with health issues as well, did you not, ma'am? your committee? Social transformation, not health as well? Not, thank you. Then I'm done.
Okay. Commissars, we'll start with you. Yes, Commissar Tembi.
Thank you very much, Commissar. Well, I'll start with the last moving forward. Currently, we do have EFF structures that are existing in Liberia, in Namibia. So for them to have established, they also are engaging with their current government status quo to change the laws in their current countries. Because you must remember, at the end of the day, we are advocating for a united Africa, which is one Africa, one currency, one passport. So all these EFF boards that have established in the other countries are advocating for that. And we said in the commission that when we are founding EFF parties in countries abroad, the main starting point should be the EFF founding manifesto. So that will be the start base, and that's how we will challenge sovereignties of the laws, and African countries will have to change their government's status quo in order to be able to accommodate how the EFF will run in those countries. And then the regions already exist in this continent. We've got 4 regions, but we said we want to establish the EFF in 3 regions, which will be the SADC, the North Africa, and the West Africa. One CIC and many presidents. For the council to function, it would mean that all these EFF Africa will come to one council, which we propose that the headquarters should be in Johannesburg, where that's how we will draft a way forward on how we get one Africa, on how we push for PAP to be a legislative body, where we push for the United Security Council to remove those veto powers, 5 countries' veto powers, so that African countries have maximum participation in boards where they can affiliate. And this can only be done with the implementation of the EFF founding manifesto. So there's no crisis. Each country will have a president for as long as borders exist, which our main goal is to get rid of. How do we protect ourselves from the West? I think you have seen that even Namibia has now 2 seats. We are very capable as the EFF. We do have capable leaders, and we can see elements of West that will try to disarm us of our mission. And as the EFF is the only political party that can liberate the African continent, that can bring the African continent and its economy and its people to be liberated and free.
Commissar Mandisa.
Thank you. I'm just going to go not according to the order the questions came. In terms of the ICASA regulations, for instance, Regulation 60 subsection, or rather Section 60 subsection 3 of the Electronic Communications Act, which deals with the must carry regulations, must be dropped altogether to allow the SABC more flexibility in terms of negotiating consent for transmission. The second thing is that when pay TV channels, or at least multi-choice in the South African instance, doesn't want to cover an event, it must be made easy for the SABC to have an automatic option to carry that event. So on the regulation side, that would be an example of some of the regulations that need to go. The question about the black-owned digital media owners is simple. When we say that the SABC must be permitted to deliver its channel through digital media platforms. That doesn't mean that we do not want, for instance, smaller operators. Of course, the EFF, as you know, insists on localizing economic activity, and that is not any different for the media space. And so it's a given that that can't be a privilege only for the SABC. The point is just that the SABC is the only channel that has proper infrastructure and network and accessibility to especially our rural communities where black poor people are, mostly found. And so if they don't have an opportunity to compete with multi-choice by not being able to have a digital platform to broadcast through, then we are basically limiting the ability of the SABC to deliver their product on a higher quality level and be able to compete on a quality level. Once you've been used to watching channels via digital, or rather DSTV, and you then get SABC broadcasting at a lower, visual level. I'm talking television now. Radio, of course, there's other options because there's online platforms and all of that. But then we have data problems on the online platforms, and we have access, infrastructure issues in terms of accessing even data through. So let's focus mostly on the television channels. And so that is the argument, and that is the point on that issue. Natasha's question on whether the SABC should be the sole broadcaster in Africa, I think maybe the resolution from the Commission was misunderstood. What we said is that SABC must be able to broadcast continentally, and therefore, of course, that has implications on infrastructure issues, on regulations issues across various countries in Africa. That was not to assume or rather imply that the SABC must be the sole. That's a ridiculous thing to even imagine. The only point is that the SABC is best placed in Africa, probably the only public broadcaster in Africa that has the potential to be able to broadcast content to many more, if not all, African countries compared to others. And that was the point from that issue. The question on relations between the EFF and certain delinquents in the media space, I cannot, I'm not in a position to give you more information on. I think the national spokesperson can, he's here. He'll probably respond to you on that one. What I do know is that no, there hasn't been a discussion with SANEF about it. But, relationships are a multi-way thing, so relationships are not one-dimensional. And so it's not up to the EFF only to reach out to some of the parties or companies, businesses in the media space where we have disagreement. We have expressed our view on why, and we've repeated that many times, and so the national spokesperson will give you his final inputs on that. I'm not aware of any SANEF discussions, but I think my parting shot really on that one is that and engaging a lot in the media space as well, is that we know, and you know as well, being the owners in most of your media operations, that, like I said earlier, the relationship is dependent on both of us, right? The most important party is the public. And so the message that we transmit, or that we wish to transmit, must also be fairly broadcast or transmitted to the public. And so when there's unfairness, and that is really the issue, when there's unfairness, we can't use a relationship breakdown as an excuse. We have to come back to issues of media ethics, etc. But like I said, the spokesperson will ad-lib on that one. I think the other question that I may have was the issue of the infrastructure. Spectrum and broadband issues. The point there was that, and I think it's an issue that's, even the Department of Telecommunications has, I think 2 years back, made certain assertions on that. So the point is that, and I think their assertion agrees, is in line with ours. The point there is that the infrastructure maintenance costs or even setup costs are very heavy, and so if they are not shared, especially amongst the larger players, you have implications on, like we said, cost, and also you have implications on smaller players. So this is to protect smaller players to be able to come into the industry. I'm not sure if I've left out a question. I didn't hear a question on Netflix. A spokesperson, can I ask them just to go over that question again? There were quite a lot.
He was, or she was asking if there was any deliberations on over-the-top programs, like Netflix coming and possibly infiltrating South Africa and South Africans no longer watching SABC and watching Netflix.
Can I come back to?
Okay. And then Telkom as the infrastructure company. Yeah, she will come back to both. Mpho?
Commissar, the remaining were addressed to Commissar Delisile, so she's in a better position to respond.
All right, Commissar Delisile.
Thank you, Commissar. I will firstly respond on the issue of the Department of Social Development in terms of the social grants. If the grants are paid through a state-owned bank, where a network is formed with the Department of Health and the Department of Education, then the government will be in a better position to even identify other needs that needs to be looked into other than paying the grants to the people. We should be able to build a state that is family-orientated, where we would be able to look into the holistic wellness of the beneficiaries, not just give them grants. And in the current situation with the Department of Social Development, I do not think that there is a plan in place that is monitoring whether these children that receive the grant are actually at school, what is happening with the grant that they are receiving, is it doing what it's supposed to be doing for them? So if there is that network that is built, number one, with these different departments working together, that will be a plus. And with the state-owned bank paying those beneficiaries and monitoring the whole process. So yes, we feel that the state-owned bank should be the one that would be a perfect way of paying the grants to the beneficiaries of the social grants. In terms of the liquor amendment bill, we have said in our resolution that as the EFF, we will continue and we will make sure that the amendment bill continues, because you have asked that will we approach the ANC government? I think that was the question. Will we approach the ANC government to pass through the bill? Obviously, the bill will have to go through the parliament, the national parliament, and which unfortunately is the ANC government. And we will be able to, the only way we'll be able to push and make sure that this amendment bill goes through, it is through the National Assembly. So yes. With the question on the Department of Women, Youth and Disability, you have said that where would we take from to make sure that there is a budget for this department to do what they're supposed to do. If I remember correctly, I stand to be corrected, as the EFF, we did not support the budget vote for this department, clearly because we are aware that one, the budget that is allocated there, it is clearly not enough, so it will not do any good for that department. But number two, the APPs of the annual performance plan of that department were not clear enough to know what is it exactly that this department is planning to do. So I believe that I'm not in a better position because I do not know which department treasury will take from to make sure that this department has money, but I believe that if it is clearly looked into, if the National Treasury looks clearly into that, there will be money somewhere that will be taken and given into this this department, which clearly should be playing a bigger role in combating what we're seeing with the gender-based violence and the abuse of youth and people with disabilities. I hope I have answered that adequately. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Let's try the last round so that we can go back to session. There are some disciplinary matters we have to deal with people that were expelled. So let me get the last round. Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6. In that order. Yes, sir.
Ziniko Mhlaba from KFM News. I would like to get clarity on this issue of Eswatini. It's been an ongoing problem for a very long time. So what strategies EFF or what practical actions will the EFF embark on to ensure that it achieves what it has just resolved right now? Thanks.
Thank you. Number 2.
I'm covered, Ngabo. Thank you. My name is Tendo Matlakwana with the Eyewitness News. So, given the fact that the EFF is not in government and may not be for a couple of years, I mean, we're only going to elections in like 2024, so it's fair.
We may be government in Swani very soon. Be careful.
But these policies speak more so to national than municipal.
I'm with you.
Yes. So, how do you envisage to see this through? In the current governance state, and how do you want these policies to find expression, and how do you hope to push for that? Because until such time that it can be pushed by yourselves, there could be other ways. For example, you can sponsor bills that support your proposals on ICASA and so on, but how exactly do you hope to push that in government? Thanks.
Thank you. Number 4. What is you number 4? Chief, don't sleep.
Okay. Hi, it's Christian Du Plessis from Netwerk 24. I don't know actually who to ask about this specifically, but going ahead now, what is the role of white people, or where do they fit into the Pan-African movement? How does the EFF see the role of white people in this movement, or whether white people should have a role at all? Thank you.
Next.
Mbuyiseni, please don't forget to answer those questions, outstanding questions that Mandisa tasked you to answer.
Or me?
Yes.
We'll see.
National spokesperson.
Hey, man.
Thanks. My name is Viewer from
It's not 4:30 yet, no? Because there's a very different conduct here in front.
Okay, I'm Viewer from Independent, and mine basically is a clarity-seeking question on the issue of international relations. You consistently refer to EFF organizations on the African continent as structures of the EFF. I just wanted to ask, how do you relate with the already existing EFF organizations in Namibia and Liberia? Do you view them as somehow subordinate to the EFF, or do you view them as independent structures whose founding was inspired by EFF?
Okay, that is the last one. Oh, yes, Chief.
In calling for a ban on alcohol advertising, you know how the alcohol industry creates jobs, even under difficult economic circumstances. Did you give consideration to that? There's a whole chain to it. It's not just the advertising. I'm sure the production levels will go down and that kind of a thing, especially with this evidence that after banning advertising of cigarettes, smoking never really went down in South Africa.
Thank you. That's all, eh? All right, Commissar Msana.
Thank you very much. How do we relate with the current EFF structures? Like I have stated, the current EFF structures draw their inspiration from the EFF South Africa founding manifesto. But at the end of the day, as we are advocating for one Africa, all these structures will have to be one EFF eventually. But currently, they are operating as independent EFF parties, which have their own manifestos, which draws inspiration from our founding manifesto. And then at the end of the day, it will happen that when this council is formed, EFF will be able to move with one voice, but addressing issues of their countries independently, but as EFF body. That's why we want the council to be formed so that we can address the continent as a whole, because we can't say expropriation of land without compensation in Zimbabwe. That's already been done. So, but they are currently participating in their own, they are pushing their own laws, because even the laws that govern Liberia are different to the laws that govern South Africa. With regards to the role that white people will play in Pan-Africanism, white people must also advocate for Pan-Africanism. We cannot isolate you according to race, but you have to have the same ideology that the EFF is advocating for. If you want to be a Pan-Africanist, then you will obviously fall into the pot of Pan-Africanism. So race does not really play a big role if your ideology is in alignment with Pan-Africanism. How do we want these policies to find expression? Currently, it is a bit tricky and difficult, but you can see that the example, expropriation of land without compensation, was advocated by the EFF, and it is finding expression in the current ANC useless government. So these laws, yes, they will find expression, and we will push in Parliament, because as you know, we are currently making laws while we are not government. Eswatini to be isolated. Eswatini belongs to boards, which currently, these boards like your UNSC are white dominated and they are run by imperialists. So while we are advocating for these boards and PAP to get more teeth and the AU Agenda 2063 to find expression, we will make sure that bodies are given more teeth like your PAP, so that we can isolate Eswatini, because poverty is increasing in Eswatini while the king is enriching himself. So in a simple term, where Eswatini is affiliated, the African continent countries which are represented in those bodies must make sure they advocate for Eswatini to be isolated until it is democratized.
Okay. Were there any other questions? Yes, Commissar.
Thank you, Commissar. On the issue of banning the advertisement of
Yes.
alcohol, yes. As the EFF, we are for creating jobs and sustaining jobs. We do realize, however, the effects that the abusing of alcohol has brought into our society. We are at a crisis point. And the advertising of alcohol is mainly to entice. And the people who are mostly enticed in using the alcohol due to the advertisements that they see is young people. So we believe that if the advertisement and the consequences on the label that are clearly there, it will reduce the intake and the abuse with the young people using alcohol. But I do not believe that it will interfere or affect the job market at all. Thank you, Commissar.
Thank you. We haven't spoken to SANEF, and we have since received their letter earlier in the year. I'm told that they might write to us again. The new leadership will apply itself. The Commander-in-Chief already said that we will speak to them. Our attitude is very different, guys, in relation to the problems we have with the media, that you need to strengthen self-regulatory mechanisms amongst yourselves that isolate intelligence or intelligence operatives who are masquerading as journalists, who are planting stories, like it happened in relation to the US and the war in Iraq. That's basically our position, and I don't think there's really much that we can do except the protest that we are launching against those that we have identified. And in the process, we still, precisely because we believe in media freedom, that's why we are saying strengthen self-regulatory mechanisms, not just the press ombudsman where people go to complain. You must have conferences to say, how is journalism going? And then hold each other accountable about your actions and so on and so forth. Academics do it. There's Association of Psychologists, Association of this and that. Vice chancellors do it. We don't know where to find a body freely associating, not of editors, of journalists, where they go into conference and reflect about the state of journalism. And we think if that can happen, you will call each other out before we call you out about your work. And also it might qualitatively improve journalism in South Africa. Otherwise, there will be degeneration where SABC is for the ANC, ENCA is for the TA, and EFF is left with nothing, with Twitter. We're all just left with Twitter and YouTube and all of that. So we have to move in very strongly into that space. I wanted to have a bite on Netflix. You must never be threatened by Netflix. You must not be threatened by any program that is broadcasting online because of the advantage of live television. Even if they're going to get live capability in the future, I think as long as the SABC pursues to have its own over-the-top programs, its content will always be brilliant. It is brilliant now with the existence of Mnet. They've been beating Mnet for all these years because they understand the South African local content. They must be supported to continue doing that even in the continent, to give us content from the continent, to reintegrate us culturally into the continent. The SABC can do that. It's got the infrastructural capability to do that. Its financial problems were caused by ICASA, more than the mismanagement there. Its financial problems were caused by ICASA, which does not allow it to compete fairly with multi-choice. There's no reason why those mass care regulations were imposed on the SABC. No reason whatsoever, because the law is clear. They were supposed to be negotiated on commercially viable terms. SABC was supposed to be making money. In these all 10 years, it's been giving multi-choice free content. Millions and millions of money, of rands. If you check, the top 10 programs best watched in the country are all on the SABC platform. The growth of multi-choice from 2 million subscribers 10 years ago to 7 million now, those 5 million happened in the time when the mass care regulations were imposed. So it must be squarely blamed on the Department of Education and ICASA, which is probably infiltrated through corruption as well. But the final point I want to take a bite on relates as well to the SABC in relation to broadcasting or digital migration. There's no reason why SABC shouldn't participate in the direct-to-home space. There's no reason whatsoever. It has been done to protect the monopoly of multi-choice. So if you're going to migrate the rest of the about 3 million households, DTT has failed. Why don't you just look into direct to home, which already has a status in any way? Direct to home is already digital. It already is able to accept the digital signal. So we must consider all those households that are already on direct to home to be broadcasting digitally, and possibly give the 3 million households access to DTH instead of being stuck with an already weak and already outdated infrastructure of Centec around digital migration. So we are very, very crisp on that. Allow the SABC to compete, and they can beat that DSTV 10-0 if you give them a chance and the space to do so. Obviously, the rest of the problems must be fixed. Sustainable boards, don't change the boards all the time you disagree with them, or every time there is a new minister of communication. Stop frequenting ministers of communication. Let there be clarity on a single policy so that there is sustainability of what must happen in the first place. If you keep changing policy, you'll disorganize the SABC. But unleash them. They can compete. Let's unleash them into that space. In our view, they can compete on their own. That's all I have to say. There's no need to fear Netflix. SABC can have its own online program. And they've got better content than Netflix, by the way. Thank you. I think that's it. We're going to close it here, and we'll come back on the basis of time, see if the rest of the other commissions that are dealing with health, with land, and so on and so forth can come to brief you. If we can't, you are still invited into this session. It's an open session. The program at the moment, once we are done with commissions, we're going to deal with the DC, then we are going to deal with the declaration, and the CIC is going to close conference. We're really close into closing. We're very, very close into that final session of the day. Thank you very much, and thank you to the commissars.